Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young for TransformPoker.com. I'm going to be reviewing a bluff catching situation for you guys. Been getting a lot of requests for hands like this lately, and I think besides the actual bluff catching spot of this, there's a lot of cool topics to discuss in this hand. So let's start out with the pre-flop action and take it from there. So we have King Queen offsuit and the small blind. An early position player opens, who's actually the hijack because we're only five-handed here. The cutoff folds, button calls, and we are in the small blind. I think this is actually a pretty good spot to squeeze because when you end up calling, you put yourself into a lot of reverse implied odds situations post-flop, or a lot of spots where you might not be comfortable check raising with top pair. So it's something to consider how loosely your opponent is raising, and I would focus much more on the original preflop raiser rather than the caller, because the caller is pretty rarely going to have a hand that dominates you. The occasional ace queen that he doesn't 3-bet preflop, and I think he probably would re-raise ace queen preflop the vast majority of the time, given that it is only five-handed, and the hijack is just going to be opening a pretty wide range, so ace queen can get some nice value preflop, and he does want to 3-bet a lot as a bluff, facing a looser opening range. So I think our squeeze, speaking of looser ranges, our squeeze has a lot better chance of working. So if we want to make it something like 13 preflop here, I think we take it down a decent amount of the time. And then two other cool things about squeezing king queen is, first off, you block a lot of value hands. So you block queens, ace queen, kings, ace king, stuff like that. And also, it just makes it pretty easy for you to tell against a lot of players' ranges what they're going to have, because usually people 4-bet ace king preflop, and rightfully so. It's definitely a good hand to have in your 4-betting range, and one almost everyone 4-bets 100% of the time. So if you do squeeze and flop a king, you're pretty content. You're pretty happy that it's the best hand. So I like squeezing preflop, but like I said, this is a bluff catching hand, so I'm sure you guys guessed that we went ahead and just called preflop. We check. The preflop raiser bets $7, and we elect to call. I think it is fine, especially with the queen of diamonds. Not that that has a large impact on our equity against the under the gun player's range, but what's important is we'll be in fewer reverse implied odds situations on the turn. So if the turn is like the 6 of diamonds, and we get bet into again, if we had king queen of clubs there, then it would be a lot more dicey. Like, are we dead against something, or nearly dead against something like ace king, or are we racing against something like ace of diamonds, jack of clubs? So it's a lot tougher to play out of position, and then to know you're facing a river bet some percentage of the time and trying to make a decision based on that. So it can be very difficult, but the queen of diamonds I think is helpful and kind of pushes me toward a check call. But you also want to think about, if we're check calling king queen of diamonds here and we're 3-betting ace king preflop, and we don't play ace 2 preflop, unless we have quad 2s, really we don't have a check raising range for value here. So if you ever want to bluff and try to avoid check folding flops like this, 100% of the time, or just check calling them only when you have a weak hand like pocket 8s, or a bluff catcher like king 10 suited or something like that, maybe, or a hand rather that'll be a bluff catcher by the river. Those are things to consider. So not check raising I think is an option, but it's pretty dicey because we do have about the best hand for our range. So usually you want to raise that up. So we check call the flop, and the turn is pretty interesting. It's the ace of hearts, and here is where I think there's just a ton of different topics to discuss. So right off the bat, you guys know this is a very, very good scare card for the preflop raiser. It's extremely unlikely that if we had a hand like pocket 8s on the flop and check called, that we are going to be check calling this turn. Even if he is betting 100% of his range, it's just very difficult to know how we're going to be able to navigate the river. We have a very small chance to improve if we're behind with almost all of our hands. Even flush draws, it's difficult to play here because the check raise doesn't really represent that much. So we don't have a lot of options here. And then if we are check raising the occasional two that we have on the flop, like probably ace two suited or quad twos, like I was saying before, then it's very easy to read our range as marginal. So that's kind of the first point, is our range is pretty face up as crap on this board run out. And that's not necessarily a product of a terrible flop play, but more so just an unlucky board run out. And that happens sometimes in Hold'em, so you kind of have to do the best with what the board gives you some of the time. So he bet 16, and I think this is a whole other topic into itself. You guys can check out a blog post that we wrote. I'll put it in the description below, but it's talking about bet sizing tells, and I think this is possibly a very big bet sizing tell. So a lot of people on a scary turn like this will just go ahead and blast the pot. They'll make it something like 22 and try to just get you to fold everything that's worse than an ace. So when he bets 16 here, it's kind of like, wait a minute, like what's he trying to do? Is he trying to get me to call again so I'll fold on the river to a 3-barrel? Or does he just have a good hand where he's trying to eke out some value? And I think against the lesser experienced players, they're less worried about balancing their range with a bet size than they are about eking out that extra value. So I think a good player might realize, like, hey, this is a great time for me to bluff, so I'm going to do it with a really wide range, which means I need to offer my opponent some pretty bad pot odds and bet large here. That would be a good player's thought process for the most part. A bad player, or not necessarily bad, but one making a more exploitive play, is going to adjust his bet size to kind of reel us in, get us to a showdown, get us to see the river. And while we do have the top of our range here, I think against a lot of people who play 50 cent $1, you could fold on this turn and be completely happy with it, just knowing that you're either chopping or you're going to be facing a huge river bet, and unless you're happy calling that, which, I mean, there's definitely players I would be ecstatic about calling in that situation, just know he's barreling 100% of the time, then that's a good idea. But like I say, I think the bet size gives away something here. So I think you could actually fold the turn, even though it's ultra exploitable, in just a small stakes game in the with the regular player, I guess the average 100 no limit player. I don't think that this sizing is balanced, and that's the crux of this hand, in my opinion. On the river, it's a total blank. Really, nothing improves besides 4-5, but we don't really have that ever. The hijack bets 35, and we elect to fold. Again, you can see he's going with these smaller bet sizes that really look like he's trying to rope us in. And of course, you can counter-exploit people who you think are good enough, skillful enough to read into the bet sizing so you can get away with cheaper bluffs in the hijack's position. But for that to happen, you're going to have some sort of like strange external history, some sort of meta game with your opponent. For example, you've seen him make an instructional video, so maybe if one of you guys are playing me in the future, you're going to own me with this. But that's okay, because you'll get better at poker, and that's what this is about. But maybe he could make a small turn bet, and then a small river bet like this, and make me fold, or make whoever fold their entire range, knowing that this is kind of the interpretation of this spot. I would say in general, though, against a 100 no limit player, that a fold on the turn and definitely the river are going to be the best play for this hand. So let me know what you guys thought in the comment section. Click that like button if you enjoyed the video, and I hope this made you just a little bit better at poker. Alright, take care, guys.